On March 13, 1964, at 3:15 in the morning, a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. The attack lasted 30 minutes. 30 minutes. At least 38 of her neighbors heard her screaming. Some of them looked out their windows. Some of them watched. Not one of them came out. Not one of them called the police. Not until it was over. When the story broke in the New York Times 2 weeks later, it became one of the most discussed crimes in American history. Not because of what the attacker did, because of what the 38 witnesses didn't do. The question that consumed a generation of psychologists was simple. Why didn't anyone help? The answer they found was not what anyone expected, and it reveals something about you, something about every one of us, that is far more disturbing than 38 neighbors who simply didn't care. Because it turns out the problem wasn't that there were too few people. The problem was that there were too many. Kitty Genovese was a bar manager. She was 28 years old. She drove a red Fiat. She was described by her neighbors as friendly, always in a hurry, always waving. She had just finished her shift at Ev's 11th hour bar. She pulled into the parking lot at 3:15 a.m., about 100 feet from the entrance to her building. A man followed her from the parking lot. She saw him and started running. She didn't make it. He stabbed her twice in the back. She screamed. A neighbor opened a window and shouted down into the street. The attacker walked away. Kitty struggled to the back of her building. She made it to the vestibule. She collapsed. The attacker came back. He found her. He stabbed her again. She screamed again. He walked away again. He came back a third time. The attack lasted 30 minutes and occurred in 3 separate intervals. Someone finally called the police after it was over. The call was made at 3:50 a.m. Kitty Genovese was pronounced dead at the hospital. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you something specific. Not just what happened that night, but the number, the precise, documented number that explains why 38 people did nothing, and why that number tells you something about the last time you did nothing too. The New York Times story, published on March 27th, ran with a headline that shocked America. 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. The number was later revised upward to 38. The headline was partially wrong in its details. The attack was not entirely in public view, and not all witnesses had a clear line of sight. Some heard but did not see. Some saw briefly and looked away, but the essential truth of the story held. People knew, people heard, and for 30 minutes, nobody came. 2 psychologists at Columbia University read the story and had the same reaction most people had: horror, disgust, the specific revulsion that comes from human failure at scale. But then they asked a different question. Not why were these people so callous, but what if callousness had nothing to do with it? Their names were John Darley and Bib Latané, and what they discovered in the years after the Genovese murder changed everything we thought we knew about human nature and moral responsibility. Darley and Latané began with a simple hypothesis. They believed that the presence of other people does not make individuals more likely to help. They believed it makes them less likely. They called the mechanism diffusion of responsibility. When there is only one witness to an emergency, that person carries the full weight of the situation. Help or don't help, the choice is entirely theirs. But when there are 38 witnesses, the weight is divided 38 ways. Each person believes, without reasoning it through, that someone else will act, that the responsibility belongs to all of them, which means it effectively belongs to none of them. They designed an experiment to test this. Participants were brought into a room and told they would be part of a discussion group via intercom. They were in separate cubicles and could not see each other. The conversation was structured so that each person spoke in turns. During the discussion, one of the voices on the intercom, a confederate of the experimenters, began to sound distressed. He mentioned he was prone to seizures. Then, mid-sentence, he began to convulse. His speech became incoherent. There was a choking sound, then silence. Here is what Darley and Latane found. When participants believed they were the only person in the discussion, the only one who heard the seizure, 85% of them left their cubicle to get help within 60 seconds. 85%. Almost everyone. When participants believed there were 5 other people in the discussion, 5 other people who had also heard the seizure, only 31% sought help. 31%. The same emergency, the same distress sounds, the same person needing help. Alone, 85%. In a group of 6, 31%. Adding 5 witnesses to an emergency more than halved the probability that anyone would respond. Darley and Latane ran variation after variation. They tried different emergencies. A woman falling off a ladder in the next room, a smoke-filled room, a theft in progress. The result held across every scenario. More witnesses, less help, every time. They identified 3 mechanisms working simultaneously. The first was diffusion of responsibility, what they had predicted, the sense that someone else will handle it. The second was pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, people look to others for cues about how to behave. If nobody else is reacting with alarm, each person assumes the situation. I want to take you out of 1964 now, out of Queens, New York, out of the apartment building and the parking lot and the 30 minutes of screaming. I want to take you somewhere quieter. You've been a bystander, not in the way the newspapers described the 38 neighbors, not in something that dramatic, something that clear, in a way that was smaller and more ambiguous and much harder to name. You've been in a group where someone was being treated badly, and you looked to the people around you to see if anyone else was reacting, and nobody was. And so you decided it was probably fine. You've been copied on an email about a decision you knew was wrong, and you said nothing because 12 other people were also copied, and none of them said anything. You've walked past someone who needed help in a public space, and kept walking because 20 other people were also walking past. None of these things felt like a choice. That is precisely the point. The bystander effect does not feel like inaction. It feels like the situation not quite reaching the threshold of emergency. It feels like someone else handling it. It feels like the social pressure to not overreact, to not make a scene, to not be the one person in the room who mistakes a minor inconvenience for a crisis. It feels exactly like what the participants in Darley and Latane's experiments felt when they heard a man convulsing in the next cubicle and did nothing. It felt like waiting to see what the others would do. Earlier, I promised you a number. Here it is. When you are alone and you witness someone in distress, your probability of helping is 85%. When you are one of 6 witnesses, your probability drops to 31%. The mechanism is not cruelty. It is not indifference. It is the simple mathematical fact that your sense of personal responsibility divides itself by the number of people present. You become, without knowing it, 1/6 of a conscience instead of a whole one. The researchers also found something else, something that appears once in the literature and is almost never cited in the popular summaries of the bystander effect. When participants were told in advance about the bystander effect, when they were explicitly warned that the presence of others would reduce their likelihood of helping, the effect disappeared entirely. 100% of informed participants helped, regardless of group size. Knowing the mechanism was enough to break it. Which means that right now, having watched this video, you are one of the informed participants. You know what the mechanism is. You know what it feels like from the inside. You know that the feeling of waiting to see what others do is not instinct, not wisdom, not appropriate social calibration. It is the bystander effect, and you will feel it again. The question is whether you'll recognize it when you do. Kitty Genovese's story was not quite what the newspapers reported. The number 38 was an approximation. Not all the witnesses had full visibility. Some may have called the building's front desk rather than the police directly. The details, when examined closely, are more complicated than the headline, but Darley and Latane's findings are not complicated. They have been replicated in controlled conditions hundreds of times. The mechanism is real. The numbers are real. What Kitty Genovese's story did, regardless of the precise number of witnesses, regardless of the specific details, was give 2 psychologists a question they couldn't stop asking. And the answer to that question turned out to be something much more unsettling than 38 people who didn't care. It was 38 people whose brains, in the presence of 37 other brains, did exactly what human brains do: divided the responsibility, looked for social cues, avoided the cost of being wrong, and in doing so arrived at the same terrible answer as a person who simply didn't care, without any of the malice, without any of the intent, without any awareness that they had made a choice at all. The bystander effect does not require bad people. It does not require indifference or cruelty or the particular coldness that we assign to villains. It requires only crowds and the ordinary human instinct to look around before acting. There is a technique that works. In emergency situations, researchers found that bystander inaction can be broken by one specific action: direct individual address. Not shouting for help to the crowd, pointing at one specific person and saying, "You, call the police." The moment you assign the responsibility to a single person, the diffusion collapses. The 31% becomes 85% again. One sentence, one finger pointed at one specific face. That is the distance between 38 witnesses and one person who acts. Think about the last time you were in a group and something was wrong. Not the dramatic kind of wrong. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't quite cross the threshold, the kind where everyone around you looks calm, and so you decide it must be fine. Now think about what it would have taken for you to act. Not heroism, not a speech, just you in that moment, choosing to be the one person who doesn't divide the responsibility, who doesn't look around first, who treats the number of bystanders as irrelevant to the question of what you should do. That's not a rhetorical question. That's the only question that matters once you know what the bystander effect is. My name doesn't matter, but now you know what you didn't know before. What you do with that is entirely up to you.